Welcome to today's deep dive. If you break your arm, an X-ray gives you this really clean, jagged white line. It is completely binary, right? Broken or not broken.
Right. It is literally right there on the
Yeah.
illuminated film.
Yeah, exactly. You can point at it and say with absolute certainty, there is the problem. But I mean, when you step into the world of human conflict, suddenly that X-ray machine is just completely
Oh,
useless.
completely.
You are basically navigating in the dark, trying to diagnose a fracture you cannot actually see.
Because the damage in our relationships, uh, it rarely presents as a clean, visible break. The most profound relational fractures happen so subtly,
Yeah.
They happen beneath the surface where nobody else can really detect them until the whole structure is just compromised.
And that is exactly our mission for you today. We are exploring this really fascinating document that maps out exactly how those invisible fractures happen and, more importantly, how to heal them before everything just
This
collapses.
is such a great text.
It really is. These are actually notes from a men's Sunday school class delivered on April 26, 2026. The speaker is Josh Sexton, and the session is titled, Handling Conflict Like Men of God.
And what is so fascinating about this source text is that, well, while it originates in a very specific religious setting, a Sunday school class, the behavioral psychology in it is just universally profound.
Oh, absolutely.
It essentially diagnoses the absolute mechanics of human friction.
Right. So whether you are, say, a manager prepping for a really tense performance review tomorrow, or you just have this lingering icy tension with a friend that you cannot seem to shake, the blueprints for disarming that tension are buried right here in this text.
They are.
So, okay, let's unpack this. I want to dive straight into the story the speaker uses to open the class because it sets the stakes so perfectly.
Oh, the story of Fred and Stanley.
Yes, Fred and Stanley. So we are introduced to these two guys. They are acquaintances at church. Totally normal interactions, right? They joke around, they pass each other in the halls. Then one Sunday, something happens. And the text goes out of its way to emphasize just how tiny this incident actually is.
Yeah, nobody else in the room even registers it. I mean, there is no shouting match. There are no overturned tables.
Exactly. Maybe Fred's tone was just like a degree too sharp. Or maybe Stanley misinterpreted a completely benign comment. But a seed is planted.
A very small seed, yeah.
And then the text traces the timeline of how this microscopic event just metastasizes.
Mhm.
So the very next week, Fred spots Stanley across the lobby, and suddenly, suddenly, Fred becomes the world's foremost scholar on the church bulletin.
Right. He's just fascinated by it.
He is scrutinizing this piece of paper so intensely that he could not possibly look up to make eye contact.
And Stanley, of course, he catches a glimpse of Fred out of the corner of his eye, and he instantly remembers this incredibly urgent task he has to complete on the complete opposite side of the building.
Which is so relatable. We have all been there.
Oh, 100%.
So fast forward to week 3. Now they are permanently stationed on opposite ends of the room. They are engaged in these highly animated, quote-unquote, important conversations with literally anyone else just to visibly demonstrate how busy and unbothered they are.
Just putting on a show, basically.
Totally. Yet if you were to pull Fred aside and ask what is going on, he just shrugs and says, I don't know what his problem is.
And Stanley will offer the exact same defense. He will say, I don't know what Fred's problem is.
But the real punchline here, the detail that makes this so painfully recognizable, is what happens when you ask if they plan to clear the air.
Right.
Both men insist, no, if he has got a problem, he can come talk to me.
Which is just classic. And the author distills this entire dynamic into one really brilliant observation. He notes that Fred and Stanley, well, they haven't solved a single thing.
Not one thing.
Instead, they have just mastered Christian avoidance. They've wrapped their refusal to deal with the problem in this nice little veneer of polite distance.
Mastered Christian avoidance. That is such a striking phrase. So Fred and Stanley, they feel safe. They think they're keeping the peace by simply staying out of each other's way.
Right.
But the text argues that this avoidance is actually an active form of destruction, which brings us to a huge question. Why does stepping away cause so much damage?
Well, the speaker pulls from ancient biblical texts, specifically looking at the origins of quarrels to make this paradigm-shifting point. The conflict between Fred and Stanley, it didn't actually start in the lobby.
Wait, really?
Yeah. The relationship breakdown is just a late-stage symptom. The conflict started entirely internally.
Wait, so in their own heads?
Inside the heart and the mind, yes. I mean, long before Fred stared at that bulletin, a narrative was already being written internally.
Oh, I see.
Pride was activated, assumptions were made, someone felt their respect was threatened. The text argues that we harbor these internal courtrooms where we act as the judge, jury, and executioner of the other person's motives, and it is completely separate from reality.
Wow, an internal courtroom. Let me throw an analogy at you because that concept is really striking.
Go for it.
It feels like this type of unresolved conflict operates a lot like emotional debt.
Oh, that is interesting.
Like, avoiding the tough conversation is basically like tossing a credit card bill in the shredder.
Right. Out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
bypass the immediate pain of having to pay it. You get that temporary relief. But behind the scenes, the interest is just compounding daily.
Oh, absolutely.
The initial charge was super small, but by the time you finally check the balance, it has completely bankrupted the relationship.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. That invisible interest is exactly what destroys the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And that leads to a crucial distinction the author makes about what we typically call warning signs.
Okay.
The text lists behaviors like withdrawal, awkwardness, forming sides, and having those hushed side conversations about someone rather than talking to them directly.
Right. Let me actually push back on that list for a second.
Yeah.
Because if I see two coworkers whispering about a third coworker, or if a friendship suddenly gets really awkward and stilted, my instinct is to say, okay, red flag. A fight is brewing. The storm is coming.
Right. That is how we usually see it.
Aren't those behaviors just the dark clouds before the actual conflict hits?
See, we are conditioned to think of those as warning signs, but the document completely rejects that premise.
Oh, it does.
Yeah. Relying on early Christian writings about the absolute necessity of undivided community, the speaker argues that awkwardness and withdrawal are not warning signs of future damage.
Okay.
They are the undeniable proof that unity is actively bleeding out in the present moment.
Wow. So the damage isn't pending, the damage is already happening.
Exactly. If you wait for the yelling to start before you intervene, you've waited far too long. The structural integrity of the relationship is already failing.
That changes the whole timeline.
It does. This is why the document places massive emphasis on preventative defensive measures. Things like radical humility, listening before speaking, and valuing others above your own ego.
Right.
Because these aren't just nice social graces, they are the sealants that keep that emotional debt from accumulating in the first place.
Okay, so avoidance is a compounding disease, and polite distance is actually active destruction.
Yes.
That leaves us with a pretty glaring logistical problem. If the relationship is quietly breaking down, who is supposed to grab the tools and fix it?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because the text makes a demand here that feels incredibly counterintuitive.
Yeah.
It introduces what we can kind of call the you go rule.
Yes. The mechanics of initiation,
Yeah.
this is where the friction really starts for anyone reading this document.
Here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. The speaker places two different biblical principles right side by side.
Right.
One principle says if someone else wrongs you, you need to go to them and point it out privately.
Okay, Mason.
But the second principle says if you are going about your day and suddenly remember that someone else has a grievance against you, you drop what you are doing and go to them to make it right.
Covers both bases.
But let me get this straight. I have to speak for everyone listening right now. If they wrong me, the text says I have to initiate the conversation. But if I wrong them, the text says I also have to initiate the conversation.
Yeah.
I am doing 100% of the walking here. How does that make any sense? Who is actually responsible?
I know, it feels like an immense injustice. And that is because our default setting is to view conflict as a legal dispute.
Like a lawsuit.
Exactly. We treat relationships like a courtroom where the primary goal is determining liability. Whoever caused the crash has to pay the damages.
Right.
But the text refuses to play by the rules of liability. Instead, it introduces the maturity principle.
Okay, how does the maturity principle bypass liability?
It is anchored in an ancient directive about the strong bearing the infirmities of the weak. The author distills this into a single, piercing line.
What is the line?
Immaturity waits. Maturity moves.
Oh, wow. Immaturity waits. Maturity moves. That is a really heavy burden to place on the reader.
It completely reorients the power dynamic. Think about Fred and Stanley. Why did they remain stuck on opposite sides of the room for a month?
Because they were both waiting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Both men were operating under the illusion that they were the mature one, patiently waiting for the other guy to realize his error and come trolling back.
Oh, man.
The text shatters that illusion. It argues that if you genuinely believe you have the higher ground, if you believe you have more emotional capacity or spiritual maturity in this situation, then you forfeit the right to wait.
Wow.
Your maturity literally mandates that you take the first step.
That is a brutal pill to swallow. I mean, my default proof that I am the bigger person is usually my ability to silently endure the other person's foolishness.
Right, the silent martyr.
Yes, but the text is saying my silence is actually proof of my immaturity.
It strips away our favorite defense mechanism.
Mm.
However, the author does provide strict guardrails for this concept.
Thank goodness, because I can see this going sideways.
Oh, totally. The text recognizes how easily human ego could weaponize this. So the document explicitly warns, going first is about responsibility, not superiority.
Okay, yeah, because if I walk up to someone and say, look, since I am clearly the more evolved, mature person in this dynamic, I have decided to come down here and fix you. I mean, I am guaranteeing an explosion.
Oh, it'd be catastrophic. You haven't initiated healing at that point. You've just initiated a different kind of attack.
Exactly.
Going first has to be an act of service to the relationship. It requires walking in with genuine humility, speaking the truth without malice, and crucially, owning whatever small fraction of the mess belongs to you. It is a rescue mission, not a victory lap.
A rescue mission, I like that. Which naturally brings us from the theory into the actual execution.
Right, the how-to.
Knowing that maturity demands you initiate the conversation is one thing, but doing it without accidentally triggering a bigger fight is incredibly delicate.
Very delicate.
So let's look at the 12-step practical toolkit the speaker provides. And honestly, looking at this, I don't see this as just a checklist. It reads way more like a surgical procedure, or actually like a bomb defusal manual.
That is a great comparison.
Right. The wires you are dealing with are human ego, defensiveness, deeply entrenched pride. If you snip the wrong wire, the whole thing just blows up in your face.
The bomb defusal metaphor is perfect because the sequence of operations matters just as much as the actions themselves.
How so?
Well, the first 3 steps are entirely about the prep work. The text advises you to pray and seek humility first, to go directly to the person in private, and to carefully choose a calm, unhurried moment.
Right, you don't try to defuse a bomb while running through a crowded train station.
Yeah.
You need a controlled environment. Because if you walk into the room hot, heavily armed with all your grievances, the other person's defensive shields go up before you even open your mouth.
The preparation phase manages your own internal threat level. If you are vibrating with anger, the other person's nervous system will detect that threat instantly.
Fight or flight kicks in.
Yes, they shift right into fight or flight mode. And once that happens, logic and empathy are entirely inaccessible.
Okay, so assuming you have managed your own threat level and you have secured a private, calm moment, you have to make the first incision.
The first cut.
And the text provides an exact phrase for this that might just be the most valuable tool in the entire document. Step 4 is to start with understanding, using the phrase, help me understand.
Think about the psychological genius of those 3 words.
Yeah.
When someone wrongs us, our instinct is to start with an accusation, right? Like, why did you do this?
Always.
But an accusation demands a defense. When you say, help me understand, you fundamentally alter your posture. You are no longer standing over them as a prosecutor. You are sitting beside them as a student.
You are handing them the microphone instead of hitting them with it.
Precisely. It disarms their fight or flight response because it invites them to explain their reality without the immediate pressure of having to defend their character.
Man, that is powerful. And once that initial diffusal happens, the operation gets even more granular.
It does.
The text emphasizes using I statements, like saying, I felt sidelined when this happened, rather than, you sidelined me.
Classic conflict resolution, but so important.
But the piece of advice that really caught my eye is step 6. Avoiding absolutes, dropping the words always and never.
Oh, those are dangerous words.
Why are those 2 specific words so lethal in a conflict?
Because absolutes create what we can call the technicality trap.
The technicality trap.
Yeah. If you tell a partner or a coworker, you always dismiss my ideas, they are no longer listening to the hurt behind your statement.
Right.
Their brain immediately stops processing your emotional pain and begins rapidly scanning their memory archives for the one single time they did listen to your idea.
Just so they can throw it back and say, aha, last Tuesday I agreed with you, so your entire argument is invalid.
Yes. You have accidentally handed them a semantic loophole.
Wow.
Instead of addressing the pattern of behavior that is actually hurting the relationship, you end up in this ridiculous debate over the factual accuracy of the word always.
That is so true.
So the text advises keeping the scope really narrow to prevent the core issue from being hijacked by technicalities.
Which makes total sense. And the document continues tightening that scope in step 9, instructing us to stay on one issue and avoid stacking old resolved problems on top of the current one.
No kitchen sinking.
Right. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, step 8 is where the true heavy lifting happens.
Oh, step 8 is huge.
The speaker says, own your part quickly, even if it's small.
That is the ultimate defensive countermeasure. Because in any conflict, the other person is bracing for impact. They expect you to lay 100% of the blame right at their feet. But when you preemptively strike your own position, when you say, look, before we get into what happened, I need to own that my reaction was out of line. And I apologize for that their armor practically falls off.
Because they were desperately hoarding all their ammunition to prove you weren't perfect either, and you just freely admitted it?
Exactly.
You gave up the high ground, which paradoxically gives you the power to actually steer the conversation.
It creates a psychological safety net. If you are willing to look at your own flaws, it becomes infinitely safer for them to look at theirs.
That's brilliant.
And this leads directly into the mindset shift required for step 10, which is to aim for resolution, not winning.
That feels like the crux of the entire manual. The internal metric of success has to change.
It really does.
The question cannot be, how do I construct an airtight argument that forces them to admit defeat? It has to be, how do we clear the debris so we can walk forward together?
Because winning assumes a zero-sum game, right? Where your victory requires their humiliation. Resolution assumes a shared investment, where the relationship itself is the actual prize.
But, the author is also deeply pragmatic.
Yes, very realistic.
Because despite perfectly executing the approach, using I statements, avoiding absolutes, owning your part, human beings are still really unpredictable.
Very much so.
So step 12 provides this necessary failsafe. It acknowledges that if the conversation remains gridlocked, you might need to pause and bring in mature, neutral help.
It is a vital admission of our own limitations. Sometimes the emotional static between two people is simply too thick.
You just can't hear each other.
Right. And bringing in a third party isn't a failure of the maturity principle. It is an extension of it.
How so?
Because it shows that you value the restoration of the relationship more than your own ability to fix it solo.
Knowing when to call for backup is its own form of bomb defusal.
Absolutely.
So as we step back and look at the entirety of these notes, the internal origins of conflict, the mandate that maturity moves first, the careful psychology of the 12 steps, what is the ultimate destination?
The finish line.
Yeah. If we do all this incredibly difficult, counterintuitive work, what does the finish line look like?
Well, the author grounds his final thoughts in foundational texts about the ministry of reconciliation. The mandate to forgive exactly as one has been forgiven.
Right.
And he boils all of that theology and psychology down into one definitive bottom line. We're not here to win arguments. We're here to restore people.
We're here to restore people. Man, that completely rewrites the job description of anyone walking into a difficult conversation.
It really does.
Because defeating someone leaves you standing alone in the wreckage. Restoring someone means you both get to walk out of the room intact.
Exactly.
And that is the direct application for you listening to this right now. Tomorrow, you might find yourself walking into a tense boardroom or sitting down at a really complicated family dinner.
We're standing in a church lobby.
Or yes, standing in a lobby desperately trying to avoid eye contact with someone. In that moment, you have a distinct choice to make about what kind of architect you want to be.
You do.
You don't have to be Fred. You don't have to be Stanley. You can be the one who actively protects the foundation.
Which leaves us with a pretty compelling hypothetical to ponder.
Let's hear it.
Consider the environments you navigate every single day. Your home, your workplace, your social circles. If you radically adopted the maturity moves principle in every area of your life, if you permanently abandoned the waiting game and chose to initiate repair the moment you sensed a fracture, how much of your daily anxiety, how much exhausting awkwardness, and how much heavy, unspoken tension would simply evaporate by tomorrow morning?
Wow. How many invisible fractures could you heal before the structural integrity was ever even compromised?
Exactly.
It requires putting down the x-ray, stepping out of the courtroom, and making the first move. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.